ഒന്നാമത്തെ പിക്ചറ് ബാക്ക്ഗ്രൗണ്ട് എന്തെങ്കിലും ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ടോ, ചേഞ്ച് ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ടോ? ഒരു ക്ലാരിറ്റി ഇല്ലാത്ത മാതിരി ഫേസ്. ഒന്ന് ക്യാമറയുടെ മേലെ ഒന്ന് തുടക്കി എന്തെങ്കിലും ചെയ്യണം. ബട്ട് വോയിസ് ഇസ് വെരി ക്ലിയർ. ശരി മാം, നല്ല ബൈ. Now it's very clear.
It is better now.
Yeah, better.
Okay.
NSA meeting. മീറ്റിംഗ് അതായത് നേരത്തെ 3:30 വരെ ഞാൻ വരാം. കഴിച്ചു സ്റ്റാർട്ട് ചെയ്യട്ടെ. എന്നിട്ട് നോക്കാം.
I think, shall we start, sir?
Yeah.
Shall we start?
Yes.
Yes. We'll join. Good afternoon, one and all who are present here virtually for the 5th webinar of the webinar series organized by NSI Bangalore chapter from July this year. As the convener of NSI Bangalore chapter,
recording in progress,
I, Dr. A. Sundravalli, take immense pleasure in welcoming Dr. THANKACHAN, Associate Professor, Division of Nutrition, St. John's Research Institute, who will be sharing his research work findings and rich knowledge with us on the topic, Adequate Process for Rice Fortification. I welcome all the participants of the webinar, the NSI members, students, research scholars, faculties, and dietitians for today's program. Rice fortification is a topic in the limelight today. Honorable Prime Minister of India announced in 75th Independence Day speech of this year, fortified rice for the poor by 2024, as malnutrition is affecting growth of poor children. It has been decided to fortify that rice given to the poor via different government schemes, he said. There are a lot of questions hovering around this after this. Is rice fortification necessary? What technology is going to be used for rice fortification? How fortification going to be done in large quantities? What is the permissible limit for fortification? How to identify fortified rice, and much more. So today we will get answer for all these things from at least from our speaker, Dr. PRASHANTH. So I request Dr. Mary Reggie, co-convener of NSI Bangalore chapter, to introduce our speaker for the day. Thank you. Over to Dr. Mary Reggie.
Thank you, Dr. Sundravalli. Good afternoon to all of you. It's my great pleasure to introduce the speaker for today, Dr. Prashanth Thangachan. Dr. Prashanth Thangachan is at present working as an associate professor, Division of Nutrition, St. John's Research Institute, Bangalore. His specialties are in nutrition physiology and healthcare technology. Over 12 years of experience in nutrition, he has 12 years of experience in nutrition physiology and public health research. He has immense experience in initiating and conducting collaborative research in the area of iron deficiency anemia, fortifications of food, use of stable isotopes to study micronutrient absorption, school-based interventions and assessment of micronutrient status. He has completed several research studies, both national and international academic groups, and 3 projects are at present ongoing. Through his research, much needed data was made available to inform policy on nutrition, on iron formulations to be used in the National Iron Plus Initiative of India. His professional degrees are PhD in Medical Physiology from St. John's Medical College, MSc in Medical Physiology from Kasturba Medical College, Manipal University, India, and he has graduated his MSc in Microbiology from the St. Joseph's College, Bangalore. He has a number of skills, over 12 years of experience in international nutrition and public health research. He has a proven record in initiating and conducting a lot of collaborative research in iron deficiency, anemia, and fortification of foods. He has facilitated international collaborations to contribute to improve nutrition and capacity building in developing countries through public-private partnerships. He has technical advice and support for research projects and health programs. His ongoing projects are long-term, which is 2 years, efficacy of indigenously developed micronutrient fortified rice, fortified with iron, vitamin B12 and folic acid in improving iron stores in school children and their mothers. It has been funded by DBT. And development and evaluation of kangaroo mother care neonatal wearable sensor. He is a co-principal investigator for this project at St. John's Research Institute, and it is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. His present research is also on stable isotope studies to understand vitamin D dose response on bone resorption rates and fractional calcium absorption in vitamin D deficient and sufficient states. He has to his credit a number of publications. We are extremely happy to have you, sir. We have been waiting for a long time to get you, and we are extremely privileged to have you here and listen from you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Mary and Dr. Sundavalli and the NSI fraternity for giving me this opportunity to speak on the rice fortification that we are working on. Am I audible to everybody?
Yes.
So this talk was supposed to be, I think, last week, but since we had Dr. Kurpad speaking on the same topic, we had to move it to this week. And earlier, it was a topic on challenges of food fortification in India, and Dr. Kurpad spoke brilliantly about that. And so I thought I'll continue from that topic to understand what the process is involved in rice fortification, because a lot of interest and a lot of questions and queries on rice fortification has been around lately, especially after the Prime Minister's speech during the Independence Day. So my talk is going to be more on the technical nature of how rice fortification is carried out. It is very different from salt fortification or oil fortification. So we will go into the different aspects of it and where the issues of rice fortification would arise. So I think in the next 40 minutes or so, I would go through the whole process of rice fortification itself, and we can have a discussion at the end of it. So let me just share my screen. Is my screen visible to everybody now?
Yes.
Yeah. So any surveys that are any large surveys that have been carried out, may be the NFHS 5 or the CNNS data, you would see that the prevalence of anemia has been high, although it has been dropping significantly in several parts of the country. You would still find a significant burden of anemia in pregnant women and in children. And if you look at the CNNS data, you would see that in the very small children up to 4 years of age, you have a higher burden compared to the children between 5 to 9 years and in the adolescents. So we still have a significant burden to overcome from a nutritional perspective. And my own study that we completed recently in North Karnataka in a place called Koppal, we found that school children, the anemia prevalence in school children actually doubled between the onset of COVID, lockdown, and schools being closed. And at the beginning of the lockdown period, the prevalence of anemia was around 20%, and by 12 months, when the COVID wave hit and all the schools shut, the midday meal was no longer operational. The anemia prevalence simply doubled. And also that anemia is not just an iron story. There are other nutrients that play a vital role in the synthesis pathway for hemoglobin, and so it is many things that come in from the midday meal that affect children. And I fear that if one were to look into different parts of the country and see how the lockdown has actually impacted the nutritional status of children, I fear that the prevalence of anemia has gone up. So in such settings, I think food fortification would be a strategy that would help the population meet the nutrient gap that they are undergoing, and would help tide them over to a time such that balanced diet that is adequately adequate in almost all nutrients, or a well diversified diet is available. But that such a diversification of the diet would take time in a country like India. And in the interim, food fortification as a strategy going forward would be appropriate. Uh, why would we need food fortification? I think one of the primary reasons is that a large part of India, especially rural India, women and children consume monotonous diets, and those monotonous diets do not contain adequate micronutrients. And as a result, the population suffer from micronutrient malnutrition, and that has a serious health risk. And also, in the process of food processing itself causes considerable losses in the nutrients, and food fortification is a proven way to add the lost nutrients back into the food. And there are several types of fortification that you get to see. What we are going to talk about is the mass fortification, where the food that is fortified is available to the masses, especially the vulnerable, who, for example, depend on the programs such as the PDS and the MDM midday meal program, where they are dependent on such programs for their food needs. The rice fortification is now primarily being targeted to be used in the mass fortification type of a scenario in our country. And there are a lot of confusion regarding what is the definition of fortification, what is a fortificant, what is a food vehicle, all so on and so forth. So found two definitions of fortification, and both of which is addition of vitamins or minerals in a food so as to improve the nutrition quality of the food and provide a public health benefit to those who are consuming it. And that is the clear definition of what fortification is. It is not limited to rice fortification. It is applicable to any food that is being fortified. And when we talk about rice fortification, and when we are talking about fortificant, uh, fortificant is the chemical component that we add into the food, such as iron or zinc. In the case of iron, it could be the chemical compound called iron ferric pyrophosphate, or sodium ion EDTA, or ferrous fumarate, depending on what you're adding. So the chemicals that provide us with these nutrients are what uh, the fortificant means. And the food vehicles are those foods that carry these fortificants. For example, you could have salt that would be fortified with iodine and iron. So salt is a vehicle for carrying iron and iodine. Similarly, rice could be a vehicle for carrying iron, B12, and folate. So food vehicles are vehicles that carry these chemicals that you add to the population as to be consumed. And premix is a blend of these chemicals that is available to you for adding it into the food. And once you add the fortificant in the form of a premix into the food and you subject it to a certain process, that food becomes fortified. And in with regard to rice, there is something called fortified rice kernels, which are artificially produced rice kernels made with the premix of chemicals of iron, B12, and folate, and rice flour. I'll go into the details of how FRK is produced, and finally, fortified rice is produced by mixing FRK with regular rice at a certain ratio. So these are definitions that are used regularly within discussion involving fortification, and often there is a lot of confusion in this. So I thought I would spend a slide and some time in setting, giving clarity on what these are. Historically speaking, I think food fortification started around World War I and II, when many countries in Europe and USA started adding fortified food into their various foods available. And this is an ad for a vitamin donut that was in the 1940s to improve the B vitamin status of the population. And in India, fortification is not really new. It's, I think, way back in 1953, fortification of vanaspati was mandated, and then salt was mandated. And several nutrition policy documents do recommend fortification of staples with micronutrients. And the very recent Kuposhan Mukt Bharat also program also specifies food fortification as one of the key strategies that needs to be implemented. Um, Coming to rice fortification, there are certain criteria for use as a good fortificant. And one of the most important criteria is the physical characteristics of the Am I audible?
Yes, sir. There is somebody. Yes, sir. Sir, you are muted.
So, in terms of a good fortificant to use, the characteristics of a good fortificant is that physical characteristics, especially shape, size, color, hardness, weight, etc., are the most important. And why would that be so crucial, especially with rice fortification? Is if you were to add a particular rice into and mix it with natural rice grains, if they don't match in shape and size, mothers usually at home, when they take rice and they sort of clean the rice before cooking, they would pick out the grains which look slightly odd in shape or slightly off color in shape, or if they detect any inconsistency on the rice, most often mothers generally take the rice and throw it out. So with regard to rice fortification, the physical characteristics of shape, size, color comes into play in a very significant manner, and this itself is a big challenge, especially when it comes to rice fortification. Second, the fortificant that we are going to use, the chemical that we are going to use, may it be iron in a form that is like iron ferric pyrophosphate or sodium ion EDTA, whatever the case may be, has to be sufficiently bioavailable to you when you add it into the food vehicle. And that food vehicle, when you consume, there should be good bioavailability from that particular food. So in terms of rice, the two fortificants that are available to use are ferric pyrophosphate and sodium ion EDTA. And ferric pyrophosphate is what is generally used for rice fortification because it provides a better color matching than sodium ion EDTA. But ferric pyrophosphate suffers from poor bioavailability, and you need to add 2 times the amount to make up for the poor bioavailability. In terms of sensory, although you may be successful in matching the physical characteristics and getting a good bioavailability, in terms of sensory, you must not, what you do to the rice should not cause any changes in color, flavor, odor, or texture at the level that you want to fortify, so that the consumer in any way should not be able to identify whether it's a fortified food or an unfortified food. For example, if you were to take iron and put it, iron containing, if you were to fortify iron containing flour in a matrix that contains chocolate, the chocolate will turn green, and if it's a drink, you will have a green sort of a layer on top, which is definitely not something that's acceptable. And if you have iron that is coming in, if it from your rice, let's say, if it is leaching out and causing interactions with polyphenols, causing changes in the food that you are cooking, the consumer may find it very unimpressive to use that food. And finally, the cost of this should not be significantly higher to such that it affects the affordability of that food. And it really should not, although whenever you do all of these things, it should not change the affordability, the consumer preferences, and all of those things. So we need to keep in mind that a good fortificant for any fortification should meet all these criterias. And similarly, there are some criteria for a good food vehicle. The chosen vehicle should be centrally processed so that you can have good quality control. Now, with the case of rice, centrally processing would mean that it cannot be done at the farmer's level. It has to be done at the miller's level. And there are hundreds and thousands of mills across the country. And so if you call that to be centrally processed, then you're looking at practically having hundreds and thousands of processing units for food fortification. Wherever there's a rice mill, you will have to put a fortification plant, because that is the place where the paddy is converted to rice and processed and stored. The next characteristic that is required for a good vehicle is that needs to be consumed regularly and in predictable amounts. Now, with rice, at times some populations do indulge in eating a lot of rice, and we need to look at how much of rice are we consuming and how often are we consuming, and all those are used in setting your levels of fortification. And then the stability and bioavailability of the food vehicle itself needs to be considered such that it doesn't undergo degradation over time because you've added the nutrients such as iron, which can cause rapid stability issues. So the food that is fortified should not undergo stability issues, and also should not change in color or appearance over periods of time that you store them, and should be acceptable to the population. And finally, even the food that is finally fortified should be economically feasible through an industrial process. And whatever level that you peg your fortification at, it should supply only optimal amounts of the nutrient. It should not lead to excessive risk of intake or toxic effects. So with all of these requirements, the FSSAI set up standards for food fortification for rice, wheat flour, edible oil, and salt and milk. And it also set up a resource center where a lot of information, data, and process was provided. And the 5 different food vehicles that it provided were for fortification were wheat flour, rice, salt, oil, and milk. And what fortificants to add to these and the levels at which it needs to be added also was specified by FSSAI, so that rice millers, food processing companies, and everybody who are involved with producing these food items could use that resource center and produce fortified food in a prescribed manner following the standards. So for rice, iron, folic acid, and B12 is what is specified as per the standards. And for rice, we have iron, folic acid, and B12. And iron, if you're using ferric pyrophosphate, the level of fortification that is allowed per kg is 28 milligrams to 42.5 milligrams. Here, being ferric pyrophosphate being a low bioavailable fortificant, I said earlier that we need to put 2 times the level. But in our earlier studies, we have seen that when we added ferric pyrophosphate at a much higher level, we saw efficacy in improving iron stores. However, in lower levels, we did not see efficacy. So currently, the study is underway to see whether ferric pyrophosphate added to rice, along with folic acid and B12, in the long term, does it result in improvement of iron stores? So we are hopeful that we will see the results of the study in 2 years' time. Similarly, other than these 3, you could also add other nutrients into rice, such as zinc, vitamin A, B1, B2, B3, and B6 at various levels, as specified by FSSAI. And also, rice has been chosen because India is one of the second largest producer of rice, and also second largest consumer of rice worldwide. And nearly 65% of Indians consume rice, and this rice is consumed in a highly polished manner. So as such lacks B12 and other nutrients because of milling and polishing losses. And so addition of B12, iron, and folate would lead to probably a large section of the population that would get iron, B12, and folate from a rice-based fortification. And so to go forward with rice fortification, you need something called the fortified rice kernels. Now, what is fortified rice kernels? Fortified rice kernels are artificial rice grains that are produced in a machine or in a 100 or 200 times the concentration of your final fortified rice. So you prepare this fortified rice grain in an extruder. I'll show you a video at the end of it. And that rice grain has to be matched. That rice grain has to be matched in size, shape, color, texture, hardness, so on and so forth. And if one doesn't do this physical characteristics matching, what would happen is, as I said, if the color is slightly off, slightly more brown or more darker in color than your natural rice grains, what you see in this panel on the left is your natural rice grain, and on the right is your FRK, what is called as fortified rice kernels. These are made after several attempts at matching the Sona Masuri rice grain that you see on the left of the panel, and the right side is a closest match we could get for that variety of rice grain. So if the color is off, as I said, the mothers may just pick it and throw it away. And if the size of that rice grain is also different from the size of the natural rice grain, then during process you can have segregation of this. Let's say the matching physical rice grain was not done adequately, and let us say a large storage facility prepared the fortified rice and shipped it over 200 kilometers across to some village for distribution. During the process, because the weight and the shape of the rice grain was not matched with that of the natural rice grains, as the vehicle is moving, there's a lot of vibration that occurs, and then if there is a risk that all the FRK grains can go to a corner of the bag and all the natural rice can segregate. And when it reaches its destination, although it will be termed as fortified rice, because the physical characteristics of the FRK that you've added and the natural rice grains were not identical, you will have the segregation and it will no longer be fortified rice. Second, you also need to ensure that the rice, the FRK that is produced in a machine, can withstand the pre-processing that a household does before cooking. That could be washing, soaking. In some households, they actually boil the rice and strain the water. Some households may cook the rice with less water, where there's no straining involved. In this processes, the FRK, the fortified rice kernel, should not break down in the water of when they're washing it. It should not leach out the nutrients into the water. And finally, while cooking, it should just not disintegrate. And also, it should not float in when the mothers wash it, because if it floats, the mother simply decants the water and you will lose all the FRK kernels, because the FRK is added at a mixing ratio of 1:100. So you would have 1 grain of FRK and to 100 grains of natural rice. So even if these are not matched, small issues can cause the entire program to be affected. As I was talking earlier, I said rice is grown. India is the largest producer, second largest producer of rice, and we grow rice across almost every region in India. And there are over 1,200 varieties of rice that is cultivated, from very white to off-white to black to in between, all hues, shapes, sizes of rice we have, and across the country different rice is used and distributed in several regions. It all depends on from where the public distribution system procures the rice. If you were to just look at what are the rice varieties used in different states across India, the 50 most commonly consumed rice I just picked out, and you can find that all of these are different in their color, in their shape, in their size, and even in the taste they are very different. So, and this is a slide which shows that we produce a huge amount of rice and we also consume a huge amount of rice. And in such a setting, how is it possible to match the various types of rice? In terms of technology for producing the FRK, there's primarily 3 technologies. One is a coating technology, the other is dusting, and finally is the extrusion. Coating is a technology which uses various forms of waxes and agar-based coatings, and then the chemical compound of iron or B12 or folate is mixed into those waxes, and then it is coated onto this rice, and then it is subjected to a process wherein the coating is held tight onto the surface. However, there have been studies which have shown that such technology, when it's subjected to our high temperature cooking, it breaks down and leads to loss of nutrients. Similarly, with dusting, we do use our rice. We do wash our rice extensively before cooking, and in that process of washing and decanting the rice, a lot of the dusting approach have failed. The technology that has been used now extensively is the extrusion technology, wherein broken rice is taken and it is powdered, and the premix is added into that powder, and then using an extruder like you would extrude pasta or you would extrude at home using a handheld extruder. There's a machine which is called as the extruder, which extrudes the mixed flour through a sort of a die, and then there is a cutter which cuts the output of that die into different shapes, and that shape is made to resemble by polishing and by grinding the same rice grain that you want to fortify. So currently, most FRK is produced using the extrusion method. Other than the hot and the cold, there is also a method called the warm extrusion method, which is which is also used extensively in the FRK industry. So there's just a process flow that I'm showing. So you take rice flour, add the chemicals to it, water, binding agent, and some emulsifiers, and you mix it up nicely in a blender, and then you feed it into an extrusion machine, which has a single or a twin screw extruder, and then you subject it to pass through a die and a cutting process and a drying process, and then you get FRK, which you blend with polished rice. The only difference between the two methods are the temperature at which you extrude is different, and accordingly it's called the hot or the cold extrusion. And there's, as I said, there's another method which is called the warm extrusion, which is very similar, except the temperature of extrusion is slightly lower than the hot extrusion. So for producing FRK, you definitely need different types of equipment. You will need a very good blender. You need a preconditioning unit, an extruder with either a twin or a double screw extruder. You need to have the knife assembly and the die plate, and then a conveyor belt and the dryers and so on and so forth. The most important part as far as rice fortification is concerned is the assembly and the die plate. Now, for every rice variety that you're going to fortify, you need to have a unique die plate that matches that rice that you are going to fortify. So in a country like ours, which has huge number of rice, how is it possible for anybody to say, okay, if for a rice miller to say, I'm going to only deal with XYZ type of rice, and so I'll only put the equipment with the die plate for catering to these particular rice variety. So it comes a challenge that how we're going to overcome, but it is definitely something that we have to think as we go forward in this process. In terms of quality control, as I said, you need to match the grain physical characteristics. You need to match the moisture content. You need to also ensure that the FRK, when you cook the FRK meets certain quality standards such that it doesn't disintegrate, it doesn't when you cook it, it doesn't just become a paste, it doesn't change color, it doesn't interact with anything else. And finally, when you subject the FRK kernels into a blending process, the FRK itself doesn't break down and become a powder. So there are a lot of quality controls that you need to put in place. And if this is being done at the miller level, at the miller's level, all of these things are going to be crucial for that miller to produce good quality. So, as I said, we have to match the physical characteristics. We need to check for disintegration on soaking, washing, or cooking. We need to validate added chemicals that you've added, whether it is really present in the FR that you procure. So you can go to the extent of doing laboratory analysis for composition, for iron, B12, and folate, if that is what you've added. Here is a picture where we took an FRK grain and we sort of sectioned it and subjected to a electron micrographic study to actually verify that the FRK contained the ferric pyrophosphate granules that was added in the manufacturing process. So what you see here in the white dot is actually an iron granule that was done to verify that the ferric pyrophosphate was added at a certain at a certain particle size, and also that iron was present in the rice grain when you prior to use in your fortification program. So you need to do, if not the electron studies, but at least you need to validate for fortification and composition by doing lab analysis, and you need to check for disintegration of the FRK on soaking, washing, cooking, floating, etc. And you can also do nutrient loss studies. So does the FRK or what you have used in your fortification program, does it really fulfill the properties that you set out with? For example, does the iron from the iron fortified rice, does it retain on washing? Does it retain on soaking? So you could set up experiments prior to your fortification studies, and this would become part of your quality analysis before you start a program from a particular FRK supplier, to ensure that the FRK that you buy are stable on washing, cooking, and various other processes that one may employ. And at the end of the day, when at the consumer level, when the fortified food is being consumed, the iron or the nutrient that is added is at the level as specified by FSSAI. So you can do nutrient loss studies prior to starting your fortification program. And there are studies in literature which has done these studies, and has shown that using hot extrusion hot or cold extrusion, the nutrient levels of several nutrients will remain in this fortified rice. So we could, so it is very clear we can make FRK, we can do all of those things, but is it possible to match the FRK with the regional rice that is being consumed across various regions in India? And each miller procures rice based on which market he gets the paddy to be at a lower price. And so there's a huge movement of rice across regions. And how would a miller standardize the equipment to match his rice stock for fortification is something that has to be figured out. And lately, a lot of extrusion and blending equipment has come in from China, which have issues with regard to dosing, with regard to blending and extrusion. So if such equipment at the miller's level is not reliable and unvalidated, it could lead to errors in the long term, and also lack of labs across various regions which are not used to doing nutrient analysis without contamination could be a factor in this large scale rice fortification. So I don't have answers to these technical challenges. I think this is where we have to seriously think, how are we going to do this rice fortification, especially when we have so much of variety in rice that's being consumed in India. So so once you have the FRK, you need to convert that FRK into fortified rice. So you take FRK and you blend it with natural rice grains in a certain ratio, so that you get, at the end of it, the concentration matches guidance. So I am showing a picture of the rice blend we use in a study. So we have on the left side of the image, we add natural rice grains, and that rice grain is picked up by a lift, and it pushes into this hopper number 2. And in the hopper number 3, we add the FRK rice grain, and the machine, you can set the machine at what ratio you want to blend, 1%, 2%, or whatever that number is. That is based on the concentration of nutrients in your FRK, and this machine would blend it in a continuous manner, and it'll push it out on the other end as fortified rice. So you will get at the other end, for every 99 grains of normal rice, you will get 1 grain of fortified rice kernel coming along with it. You then take it to another machine that will weigh it, pack it, and you get fortified rice kernels, fortified rice that you can distribute. So, as I said, there are two types of, you need to blend the FRK with natural rice grains, and there are two forms of blending that you could do. One is a batch blending, and one is the continuous blending. The image I showed you earlier is the continuous blending that you can do when you have large volumes of rice that you need to produce. And continuous blending is suitable for large scale producers, and batch blending is suitable for small scale blenders, small scale processors, where the batch blending is basically a drum, in a rotating drum in which you add a known amount of natural rice grains and a known amount of the fortified rice kernels, and then you let it to spin in a predetermined manner such that there is good mixing that occurs. And there are different benefits in terms of cost and in terms of volumes and in terms of efficiency. So I would not go much into it. It all depends on how big a processing company you are. You would use either a batch mixer or a continuous mixer. So once you have the fortified rice, you also need to ensure that the fortified rice are subject to certain quality standards. And one is you need to make sure that your fortified rice producing blender produce consistently good concentration of fortified rice. And there is no easy way to do it, but to actually take the rice that's coming out of the blender and pick out the fortified rice grains and see what is the ratio that you're getting. And that is a laborious process, and one has to do that to ensure that your machine is truly producing fortified rice in the concentration that you want. If your blender is doing a bad job of it, you would get either the concentration to be much higher than your set target as per FSSAI, or it would be very low. In both cases, it would be not advisable, because in the lower case, it would not benefit the consumer, and in the case where there's higher amounts in one batch, the consumer may have issues in terms of the amount of iron that he would be consuming. And finally, the cooking quality also has to be tested. It should be stable to heat and other things, and it should not compromise on any appearance, taste, or odor. And all the raw materials that are going into this process needs to have a certificate that it is safe for human consumption, and the broken content of rice that comes out of the blender has to be minimal. So if you're getting if your blender is either running too fast, or then you may have the rice breaking down. And broken rice is something that when you have at home, the consumer may find the structure of the cooked rice to be different and may not like it. So you also have to follow good manufacturing processes and other applicable regulations before you set out to manufacture fortified rice. One method of really checking whether your fortified rice is meeting the ratio that you have set, you can use iodine solution, and you can pour it into the fortified rice, and you can find that the iodine solution will form a color difference in the FRK grains versus the natural rice grains. And then you can pick those rice grains, and you can sort of count as to what is the amount, or weigh the amount of natural rice grains versus FRK to validate whether your blender is producing the adequate ratio of fortified rice. And so this is one step that is to be done after your blending process is completed. And this needs to be done regularly, so that your machine, the blending machine, is always for every continuous batch, you need to do a QC of this. So here you see the test that is done on the leftmost corner. You have normal rice grain, and your FRK that is slightly darker in color is being coated by the iodine solution, and it's reacted with the iodine solution, and all those dark grains are the artificial FRK grains that we have added into the blender. The other way one can do is actually coat the artificial rice grain or the FRK with a food color and then pass the natural rice grains and the colored FRK grains through the blender, and then workers can take 1 kg aliquots and then pick out the colored FRK grains and verify to ensure that the mixing ratio is adequate. One important aspect that needs to be strengthened in programs such as fortification in a large setting such as India is monitoring and evaluation. Now, monitoring needs to be set at every level, or at the producer level, at the rice mill, at the PDS, at the storage facility in the large FSSAI godowns. We need to see how, when you store rice, fortified rice over a large period of time, it can be few weeks to several months before the rice that comes into a certain godown is moved to distribution. So in that period of at differing temperature and humidity across India, what happens to the fortified rice? Does it degrade? Does it undergo changes? We do not know, and so monitoring is very crucial even at the storage facility. And finally, during transit, as I spoke, if the FRK is not matched well with your natural rice grains, at transit there could be segregation that can occur, and that segregation can lead to inconsistent doses of the fortificant, leading to erroneous outcomes. So monitoring has to be distributed across several levels, and similarly the evaluation of the consumer who is going to, or the beneficiary who is going to consume this, needs to be monitored at the household level. We need to evaluate if the rice is effective at the end of a time period. I mean, what that time period needs to be decided based on the dose at which we are giving and how often they're consuming. So evaluation is something that is lacking. For example, we all consume iodized salt, but we have not been evaluated whether we really need iodized salt or not. Some pockets of the country are reaching excessive iodine intake. Similarly, with rice fortification, right from the beginning, I would think that monitoring and evaluation should become a very big aspect of this entire program, and the beneficiaries have to be evaluated over time for either biomarkers and understand whether the fortified rice is effective or not, and assessment of any adverse events when we are giving it into the population or the community, because iron is a nutrient that can react with several other things. And if we are going to consume rice, and I know people can consume a lot of rice, and is there any adverse effects that is happening? I don't see a program to monitor the adverse effects, and that needs to be put in place. So monitoring and evaluation becomes very crucial in large programs such as this. And finally, at every level of monitoring, we need to do analysis of the nutrients that you add. So if you're adding iron, B12, and folate, you need to send the samples to several labs with blinding and also with QC, quality control material, such that you are able to understand what is the level of the FRK, level of the fortificants in your test food, and whether that complies with FSSAI standards or not. So this is one test report for iron that we got done. So you need to send samples from your fortified process to various labs and get an analysis of all the fortificants. And finally, there are a lot of issues where the millers are unhappy about the cost burden that they need to take. So if you're looking at putting an FRK line, a simple twin extruder can cost anywhere between 30 to 40 lakhs, while a high capacity extrusion line may cost crores of rupees. And finally, the incremental cost of fortified food ranges from 1% to 10%. And but in a mass fortification programs, the government picks up the bill of this. So it is going to be a cost to the government, but although however small that cost may be, it would be a number that the government has to foot the bill. So in all the fortification of rice, wheat, milk, and salt, the cost of rice fortification increase is about 1.33%, which is compared to salt is very little. So several states have gone forward with the pilot programs for rice fortification, and even in Karnataka, in the northern districts of Gangavati and Koppal, there are programs to start fortified rice in the midday meal program. And there are several parts to this. So fortification of the rice is one component. There needs to be capacity building and training. Quality control is a huge aspect of this, and finally monitoring and evaluation. So all of these things, all of these other 4 or 5 components need strengthening, and I think this is where it'll open up a whole world of research questions. And I think as the nutrition fraternity can engage with these things, asking various questions, whether is this right, or is this correct, or is this appropriate. So going forward with rice fortification, I think a lot of research needs to be done, and it also opens up a lot of opportunities for all of us. So that was my talk, and so I would share a small video of the FRK extrusion process, and also a blending process that I have put together a very small video. Is this video screen visible?
Yes.
Okay. So here, yeah. So what the first step is to take broken rice. So in this is broken rice, and you put it into a pulverizer and make it into flour. Then you take the flour and chemicals and add it into a blender, and then it is finely mixed with iron, B12, and folate. And once it is mixed thoroughly, you push it into a twin screw extruder, and you set the various temperatures and other things. Just like how pasta is extruded or noodles is extruded, this machine extrudes out the rice grains. And this also has the dye that you have made for that particular rice grain in terms of shape. And so what falls out is an artificial rice grain that you take it out and dry it in a dryer so that it becomes hard. And following the drying, you would polish it just like how you would polish the rice grains in a rice mill. So that's your dry FRK. And then you put it into a polishing unit, and you polish the rice grains. And this rice grain would be identical to your natural rice grain. And then you push it into a blending unit, and then what you get out is fortified rice. Now this unit is a pilot plant, and here I'm showing you is a large plant that we have put at 2 tons per hour capacity. So you have 2 large hoppers. One is for the normal rice and one is for the natural rice. So you see here natural rice in a predetermined manner falling into the blender, and it is blending. And as it blends, it moves forward, and then it gets lifted up into an elevator, and then into a packing machine, a weighing machine, packing machine, and then it gets packed. So a predetermined weight is given out, and then it goes into a packing machine. So here is a trial. In the place of a premix, I have used colored rice. So you take natural rice and push it into the machine. and you put your green colored FRK into it. So the natural rice is lifted up into the hopper. And into this is the premix. So you see natural rice in predetermined manner coming down. And here you would see premix, which is colored for visibility, falling into the same bin. So this is in a ratio of 1:99. And then it undergoes blending in this large tube there. And what comes out on the other end of the machine is fortified rice at the particular ratio that you have set. So you see these red rice is your premix that has come out blended with natural rice grain. That is lifted up into a holding silo, and then it goes into packing, weighing and packing. So here, as per the weight you need, it's going into the packing machine, and then it gets packed. So at the beginning of every continuous batch, you take rice in known quantity and pull out the FRK and validate whether your set ratio is being blended adequately. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prashanth THANKACHAN, for this very extensive talk with all the details from the key terms to the process, monitoring, evaluation, transport, the cooking method, and it was very in detail. Now we really understood what that fortification really goes through. Doctor, would you like to take the questions?
Yes, please.
You're able to see the questions. Or you want me to read it out?
I did. So, okay, one of the questions, how can we differentiate between normal and fortified rice? If the rice fortification is done well, you will not be able to identify the normal rice grains from FRK. And that's very hard to do. And I would think any rice fortification program should strive to reach that stage where the consumer is not able to pick out the rice. And it is one of the tests that you need to do before you set out the rice fortification program is you give this rice and ask them in a sense, it's called a sensory test or a triangle test, where you give women who normally use rice at home and give them fortified rice and natural rice and ask them to pick if there are any differences between the two, and they should not be able to pick the difference. The next question is how long fortified rice can be stored? We have seen in the past that it could be stored for 6 months. We are currently doing a study where we are looking at storing it for even longer, maybe even a year in field conditions. So I don't have a straightforward answer for you on that, but I would think so far we know that for 6 months it stores well, as long as you don't you protect it from pests that come into stored rice. Since Indians consume a large quantity of rice at all income levels, will this iron fortification lead to excess? The answer to that is if you consume rice in excess, yes, there could be a possibility that you could have a small a segment of the population may be having an excess, but also that the physiological process of upregulation and downregulation of iron occurs very well in the body. So if you are iron deficient and you are in that excess consuming category, over time your own absorption will sort of upregulation or downregulation of your own absorption would be downregulated, and then your absorption will go down. But that entire iron finally will go into your gut, say in your colon, and we don't know whether it causes adverse effects, just like high doses of iron when you give iron supplementation. So that is why you need to put in a proper monitoring and evaluation program along with such large, when you are going to distribute it to a large population. So monitoring and evaluation becomes critical. Any chemical testing or animal testing studies will be done to know the safety level or toxicity level after fortification process. I think in terms of the upper tolerable limit for iron has been specified very well by FSSAI and the document, the ICMR document. So what is excessive and what is toxic is already known. So we need to make sure that the fortification levels do not reach those levels, and we are only fortifying to fill the nutrient gap in the dietary intake of the population. So analysis of your dietary intake needs to be done very well, and you need to understand what the nutrient gap is, and only then you need to set your level as per your new recommendations for EAR. And if you do it well, I doubt that it would lead to such toxicity levels, but there may be a small population who are consuming a lot of rice, may run into the risk. And again, monitoring and evaluation is key to such large programs. If fortified rice cooked in iron vessels, will it have any adverse effect or any such? As far as I know, I don't think there is any effect on fortified rice cooked in iron vessels. It may just add a little more of iron, because iron vessels have shown in the past that when you cook food in iron vessels, some amount of iron comes, but not for rice, but for acidic foods you may get that. But the answer is no. Can you please share the video as well as the PPT? Yes, I think the video is available, and the PPT also can be shared. Implementing the scheme is a big challenge. What is your take on it? Yes, this is a big challenge, and a lot of discussion coming forth, whether it is needed, whether it is not needed. Should we, instead of mass fortification, should we approach a targeted approach and provide it to targeted people? So all of those are valid discussions and deliberations that are ongoing. I think from a point of my personal opinion is that food fortification is a huge scheme, and yes, I would go ahead with it, but only if proper evaluation and monitoring is in place. In the absence of an evaluation and monitoring, I would not go ahead with the fortification at such large scale. So we have to strengthen the monitoring and evaluation and quality control, and then get that data in, and then look at everything. And a lot more data is required in terms of, at the fortification level of 4.25 milligrams per 100 grams of ferric pyrophosphate, are we getting a benefit or not? That itself is something that we need to find out. So there's a lot more work to be done, but with monitoring and evaluation, I think we should do rice fortification. Is fortified rice kernels polished? Nutrient loss is not there. Yes, fortified rice kernels are polished, and you add excess into this process so that you can come the losses because of the process involved in manufacturing of the FRK. And at the end of all the processes, what you get should be compliant with the FSSAI guidelines. Will there be a difference in the taste of fortified rice and normal rice? No. If done well, and if you have subjected it to a sensory evaluation, and women who normally cook and consume rice are unable to pick the differences, even you will not be able to pick the differences. But in field experience, there have been situations where there are certain people who are extremely sensitive, and they will come and tell you that this contains something and it tastes like iron. So there is a very small segment of the population who are extremely sensitive to the iron taste, or if that person is anemic or iron deficient, the person can be sensitive, and such individuals may be able to pick the difference, but it's a very, very small number. I think I've answered all the queries. If there's any more questions, I'm happy to take.
Thank you, sir. I think you have answered all the questions are answered. Thank you for taking your time out to answer all these questions. And kindly update us on the implemented and on revelation, what is the process, etc. So thank you very much, sir, Dr. Prashanth Thangachan, for being with us and spending your afternoon and taking your time on process. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Dr. Sundravalli, you would like to close the session?
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Prashanth, for such a wonderful presentation, taking us through from the processing to also about the micronutrients and the vehicles which we can use for processing, and also about as to all the questions that you really big challenge, whether the government will be able to do this at the mass level. As you said, it should be a targeted population only in the beginning. I think all fortification we cannot do with rice. I think. I mean hope it is not like a solve. No, sir. It's not like that. Hello, can you?
Sundravalli, it's breaking.
Ma'am, it's breaking. It is unstable, so I will just close it. Oh, thank you very much. Thank the participants for their presence and asking the questions towards this session. Thank you, one and all. I thank Dr. Mary Reggie for moderating, and Ms. Lakshmi Jitendran for the technical support, and all the NSI executive members and the other members who are present here, the students, the scholars, and the faculties who are here with us today. Thank you, one and all. Thank you.
Ma'am, can we have a snap?
Yes.
Yeah.
Doctor, please switch on your camera. We need a...
Actually, there is...
Dr. Prashanth Thangachan, please don't leave. We just need a photograph. Yeah. Can you just switch on your camera?
I think participants can switch
All
on
the
their
participants,
videos.
please switch on. Yeah. Can you just switch on your camera? Yeah. That is nice. Yeah. Surupa?
Jyoti, Dr. Jyoti is there.
Dr. Jyoti, Surupa.
Banu ma'am also there. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Yes, taken.
Nandini, Purnavi.
you.
Thank you, Lakshmi.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for coming and being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sundraval.
Kindly
Thank
fill
you.
up the feedback form, participants. It is posted in the chat box.